our founders kept saying in various ways, limit power, focus on personal character and improvement. Any society that loses that, loses its character, what happens in the political realm isn't going to matter all that much because you're headed towards dictatorship.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira, part of the outreach team of Silver Bullion here in Singapore, where we want to help you truly secure your wealth. Dr. Lawrence Reed joins us today. Dr. Reed became president of the Foundation for Economic Education, or FEE, back in 2008 after serving as chairman of its board of trustees. And recently, in 2022, Dr. Reed was named by the president of Poland as a recipient of the highest honor that Poland bestows upon a foreigner, the Grand Cross of the Order of Merit of the Republic of Poland. One other who received this distinguished award was U.S. President Ronald Reagan. And we are honored to have Dr. Reed join us here today on SBTV. It's time to saddle up and silver up for Dr. Lawrence Reed. Dr. Reed, welcome back to SBTV. How are you doing?
Hey, just terrific, Patrick. Thanks again for having me.
Glad to have you back on. Really glad to have you back on. First thing, I wanted to start off by asking your opinion on what we're seeing with the Asian markets, European markets, the US markets, which all look to be in red. In fact, Bitcoin, gold, silver, all getting hit hard as well after seeing these unemployment numbers rising and July's non farm payrolls report falling well short of estimates. What's your opinion on all these things?
You're right, of course. There are major sell offs underway in markets all over the globe today and in a steeper decline than we started to see late last week. I know that the conventional wisdom is that the reason for this decline is evidence that the American economy is slowing and may be headed to recession. And that's entirely possible, of course. But I think there's another factor weighing on the markets today, too, that's not getting the attention it deserves, and that is the impending strike by Iran in some form against Israel and the potential then for some wider war. I'm sure investors have that uppermost in their minds, as well as a possible American recession.
Yeah, completely agree. I hear a lot of chatter about that too. I think we're beneath it all. I think we're even hearing concerns with oil once again. I mean, if
Yeah.
we should get in trouble with oil rises, we're going to see the price of everything rise.
Yeah, it's in fact, there are people in America in high places who are urging Israel, if Iran does indeed strike, to take out the oil refineries or as many of them as they can in Iran. And, that's a decision Israel has to make. It's the one that's on the front line, but that would certainly have an effect on world oil markets. Oil prices would surely spike, maybe well over $100 a barrel. And that's not good for any economy, especially one that may be teetering on recession to begin with.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, a great point because I was going to ask you, should oil get back to over $100 per barrel? How do you think the U.S. can fare with that price, especially with employment rates or unemployment rates going up?
Yeah, $100 plus oil would certainly hurt and would perhaps be enough to tip us into a quarter or more of downturn. Um, and there doesn't seem to be any concern in Washington about uh, all the negative consequences of the last 3.5 years of Joe Biden suppressing oil output. I mean, oil output has been high, but it could be so much higher and prices could be so much lower, and we would be so much better positioned for a spike in prices if Joe Biden hadn't done all he could to reduce American energy independence and oil production.
Yeah, right. I do recall that time where I think for the first time in history, U.S. was oil independent and in fact was selling oil into the markets.
Yeah, we should be the Saudi Arabia of oil. It's sitting here. We've got it, but the Biden administration doesn't like oil, and so it's trying to force us down the path of things like electric vehicles that nobody wants.
The auto unions, they really aren't in favor of that. I don't think the infrastructure in the US could really handle really an EV centric type of transportation method. It's just not built for it right now.
No, that's right. And even the U.S. government a few years ago, when Biden secured passage of a bill to spend billions of dollars on building EV charger stations. I don't know why the federal government should be in that business to begin with, but nonetheless, after all those billions of dollars, I think the latest count is that they've completed seven or eight of these new charging stations. They're just not anywhere near common enough to prompt people to want to buy an electric vehicle. And once again, it's the central planning mentality that wise people with good intentions in Washington can manage markets in ways that will make us have a better future than markets themselves could ever conceive. It never works that way. It's ridiculous. These are people who can't balance their own budgets, whose personal lives often are total messes, who know very little about economics, and yet they're trying to manage national economies. It's preposterous and very costly.
Hey man, these things, of course, recession comes to mind. In some cases, even poverty. And back in 2005, almost 20 years ago, you gave a speech at a conference titled "The Road from Poverty to Freedom: A Look Backward and Forward at the War on Poverty." Dr. Reed, when you think of that speech back in 2005, almost some 20 years ago, where are we today, and how do you process the 20 years since?
Well, I'm sure I gave that speech, but I can't remember where. But I certainly remember what I likely said about it because I've talked a lot about poverty and how to get rid of it over the years. Poverty is what happens when nobody does anything, you might say. It is sort of the natural state of things. If we all just sat around, did nothing, didn't do things like invest and create enterprises, take risks, hire people, build a plant, invent and innovate, if we didn't do those things, if we just sat around waiting for wealth to come our way, we would all live in poverty and probably not very long either before we'd all croak. Poverty yeah, Adam Smith, the father of economics, addressed this way back in his day when almost everybody in the world lived in poverty. He didn't entitle his book in 1776 An Inquiry into the Poverty of Nations. He called it An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. And the reason is, again, he observed that poverty is what happens if nothing happens. So something has to happen to prompt people to raise their standards of living. And he showed us back then, and many economists have reinforced it since, that you get out of poverty, first of all, when you get off of people's backs, you get out of their way, you provide an environment in which capital is safe to be accumulated, investments are safe to make because you can be rewarded for them if you are successful in the marketplace. We don't vilify entrepreneurs who create wealth and employment. If you want to get rid of poverty, you don't vilify those people. You praise them, you encourage them. And so when people have an environment in which life and property is are reasonably safe, then they go to work on poverty because it's in the interests of entrepreneurs to find ways to solve the problems of other people, invent, create, hire, manufacture, put goods in front of people that they want and will buy and buy repeatedly. And that's how you get out of poverty. But so many nations have not seemed to learn that. And instead of getting out of the way and allowing such wealth to be created and poverty to be conquered, they think the best way to go is for politicians to manage an economy, to regiment it, to issue orders and commands, and somehow wealth will spring into being. Socialize the economy, in other words. But that never works. I can think of endless occasions in history when some form of socialism, government planning, government control has created a disaster. And then ultimately, as a last resort, in some cases, the people say, enough of that. Let's have some kind of capitalism, free markets. Let's get the government out of the way. And then the problem is solved. But I can't think of a single instance when freedom, free markets, capitalism, whatever you want to call it, has created a disaster that then socialism comes in and saves us from. None. Not a one like that. And so many examples of poverty that was ended by spectacular economic growth brought about by capitalism. Hong Kong after World War II, Germany in the 1950s after defeat and devastation. So many other examples in world history. The United States. I mean, we were all poor practically, except maybe 5% of us 230 years ago. But we created wealth, and we did it not by reliance on government, but on ourselves.
If you're enjoying this interview with Dr. Lawrence Reed and I, please do consider subscribing to our YouTube channel and giving us a thumbs up. And did you know that at Silver Bullion, when you store with us, you can use your bullion as collateral for a secured loan? Silver Bullion's peer to peer bullion secured loan program has enabled people storing with us to have made some 600 million plus US dollars worth of loans with zero defaults. To find out more, go to www.silverbullion.com.sg and click on the P2P loans tab or email me, Patrick at silverbullion.com.sg, and I'll help to get you started. Great points there. Um, today with the debt, I mean, there's good debt and bad debt. I mean, sometimes you can use debt to become wealthy, let's just say, and sometimes there's bad debt where it only leads you more into debt. And the debt we have today seems to be bad debt that's going to lead us more into debt. Do you think, let's say, the government's, it may be even the central bank, the Federal Reserve, they may be lending into these things that may put people, unfortunately, more and more into poverty?
Oh, yeah, the debt is a time bomb, a ticking time bomb. And when it goes off, we don't know exactly when or in what form that may take, but you'll see things like a flight from the dollar, a flight from investment in the US, maybe the loss of our reserve currency status when people lose faith in the politicians and their management of the economy. All of that would be poverty inducing, no question about it. And yet there's so little concern about the debt in Washington. As you point out, Patrick, some debt is entirely justifiable. On a personal level, we can justify going into debt for capital projects, going into debt to invest, let's say, in your education, assuming you're not majoring in gender studies, but rather something that actually adds value to society. Then that can be justified. And in government, investment in things like necessary infrastructure or defense spending to protect the country from war, that can be justified. But that's such a tiny share of the total debt. I mean, we're going into debt for the very worst of reasons, and that is to finance current consumption, massive spending, and not so much on future oriented projects that will pay dividends, but rather just to finance the current desire of politicians to spend and get reelected. And that cannot be justified. Sending the bill for that kind of spending to the next generation and beyond is morally reprehensible and economically unjustifiable.
Right. Yeah. The reason why I'm bringing up these topics is I think I saw a number where in the 2022 census, I think 11.5% of people in the US were actually living in poverty. I think they were only spending 24, $25 a day. And so with that number, with the looming recession, with all the talk about how the economy may not be doing so good, maybe even a financial systemic uh, type of depression going on, do you think this could end up being perhaps worse than what we saw in the Great Depression?
Oh, well, It's hard to imagine at the moment, in the very near term, that unemployment could reach levels of the Great Depression. Although there's nothing that says, just because we haven't seen that in the last 80 years or more, that it couldn't happen again. If you constantly repeat the same mistakes, you have to expect some similar consequences. And in many ways, our policymakers are committing the same mistakes that were committed back in the 1920s and 30s, inflating the economy, then deflating it, and um, jacking up the cost of business through regulations and mandates and what have you. So it's not inconceivable, but during the depth of the Great Depression, unemployment was as high as about 28%. We've not seen anything like that since, but never underestimate the capacity of a bumbling government to create the worst situations, even as it promises everybody that it's thinking only of you.
Yeah, Dr. Reed, it was cited in a speech you gave where Tom Anderson, an old friend of yours from Tennessee, once said back in the 70s Franklin Roosevelt proved a man could be president a lifetime. Harry Truman proved any man could be president. Dwight Eisenhower proved we really didn't need one. And every president since proved that it was dangerous to have one. Dr. Reed, can you walk us through this kernel of truth as you described it?
Yeah, good old Tom Anderson. He was quite the humorist and had a lot of great one-liners over the years. He said that in the 60s and 70s repeatedly in various speeches around America. And that was before Reagan became president. I'm pretty sure he would have fought Reagan to be a break from those traditions, a little better president than the previous ones. But that comment of his was intended to highlight the fact that Roosevelt was in office for such a long period. He was elected to a fourth term, unlike any president before him. He passed away a month or so, or a few months into that fourth term, so he didn't serve it. But that's a lot of times to be reelected. And certainly by that third time, if we had known the health situation he was in, we wouldn't have reelected him, I don't think. But it seemed like he was around for a lifetime. And then after him, Harry Truman was thought of by ordinary Americans, whether you liked him or not, but we thought of him as yet another ordinary American, just like us. He wasn't part of the East Coast elite. He came from the middle part of the country, seemed to have both feet on the ground. He wasn't tied into those ivory tower circles that FDR was. So we thought his being president was evidence that in America, maybe anybody could rise to that position. And then Eisenhower, Tom Anderson said that he proved that we really didn't need one. That was a suggestion that Eisenhower, whether he was a good or bad president, nonetheless kind of exuded the air of um, normalcy and quietude and not meddling in our faces at every moment. So it seemed as though we really didn't need one because he wasn't doing a whole lot. I wish more presidents didn't do very much. Um, and then Anderson said every president since has proven that it's dangerous to have one. I'm sure he was thinking of Lyndon Johnson, especially, who cranked up unsustainable, costly welfare state programs we still are grappling with today. And I don't think Anderson thought very highly of Richard Nixon either, and probably not. Probably thought Gerald Ford wasn't much of an improvement. But it was his comment really was a sad reflection on the fact that America has been in a stretch where we haven't been finding the best people and catapulting them to office. It seems like we are finding the worst, or at least people at the lower end of the scale. And that's dangerous for any free republic. You crank up a big government, you better hope that you get halfway decent people who will not abuse that apparatus. But if you get big government combined with bad people, you've got the worst of both worlds.
What he had said back then, do you think he might say something where after we don't need one, he might say, "Do we even have one right now?"
Yeah, yeah, I think he might. That's an interesting thought. My guess is Tom Anderson would not think that Joe Biden is really in charge. I mean, who does? Who does? Um, so, you know, who's the real acting president or presidents? Who knows? But I'm pretty sure that Joe Biden is catering to the left of his party because they're the loudest voices in his administration.
It's a great point because I'm outside the U.S., right? I'm even though a U.S. citizen, I'm in Singapore, and people do wonder, who's really in charge of the U.S. after seeing all of these things happen. I mean, who's really in charge, who's making the calls, what is really the policy. If they don't know who's in charge, of course they won't know what policies will be, and it's throwing a lot of distrust with the U.S.
Yeah, no question about it. I'm one of those people who just can't wait until this administration ends, one way or the other, uh, because it's drifting, and when it does anything, it's off the wall wrong, far left. It's really one of the silliest and most destructive administrations in memory. So can't wait to get it over. But the prospects for something much better, are a little mixed at the moment. Trump has his problems, and Harris would probably be even worse than Biden. So, politics is. This is one of the reasons why America's founders very wisely said, in so many ways, over 200 years ago, keep it small, because you concentrate power in Washington. Increasingly, the good people in society don't want to have anything to do with it. And the bad people then get their way into office and have great power to do damage. And that's what we're seeing, big government in the hands of bad people.
With that speech, that essay, government, poverty, and self-reliance, what would you say is the relationship of government, poverty, and self-reliance? And has it gotten to a point where self-reliance is probably more important than ever?
Self-reliance has always been the most important thing. I tell everybody the last thing you should want is to be dependent upon politicians. I mean, they are torn in a million directions. And, if they decide, let's go to war in four or five different places, all of a sudden the handouts that you're dependent upon may be in jeopardy. So it's best, I think, in any circumstance to be as self-reliant as your capabilities allow. And then secondarily, build or put down deep roots in your community so that you can access civil society institutions in the event of great need. Don't put yourself in a position of where government is your first and last resort. It will always disappoint. Now, government can be a positive force in resolving poverty. It can do what it's supposed to do, provide a safe environment for the accumulation of capital, uh, prosecute crime and thereby hopefully prevent it in the first place, provide a system of courts and justice and defense against peace breakers here and abroad. If that's all government did, it would have a full-time job in its hands. And the more it tends to drift from those fundamental duties and do, just about anything anybody asks of it, the less well it does the most important duties. And that hurts everybody, especially the poor, as they try to pull themselves out of poverty. But self-reliance in a free economy has always been the best prescription for personal progress.
Right. Amen to that. Dr. Reed, do you think this question, has Americas, or even maybe the West in general, have their best days passed?
Well, I mean, I know at the moment so many trends are going in the wrong direction. So much work needs to be done to re-educate people in ideas of freedom and free markets, respect for life and property, and the rights of other people, and free speech, and so forth. But I haven't given up yet. I think it's important to be optimistic, and that any nation, any great nation especially, is going to have its hills and valleys. It's going to have times when it looks like things are pretty desperately bad. But if you plant enough seeds throughout good times and bad, seeds of ideas of liberty. And then, with good leadership in difficult times, you can bounce back and reach new heights of progress and greatness. That's still my hope. I've always been an optimist because I've never seen the point of pessimism. Pessimism makes you not work as hard for what you know to be right because inwardly, you've already given up. And pessimism doesn't attract other people to your cause. So I think it's important that we be optimistic, that we remember that even a small number of good people committed to the right ideas can make a huge difference, sometimes when you least expect it.
Yeah, Dr. Reed, I know you know the founding fathers. I mean, you've studied them, I should say. What do you think George Washington, I just want to throw this out here. What do you think he would tell the two main candidates that we have today to lead the US to be able to either lead the world or maybe lead the country and take care of the country first? I mean, what do you think he might say?
I'm guessing that if he had the opportunity, if George Washington had the opportunity to talk to the two leading candidates, he would first say, I need you for several hours because you need a lot of work. And I think he would want to lecture them on several things. One is just personal decorum and character. I think both candidates have a lot of work to do in that area of, mutual respect and dealing with each other in a civil, adult fashion. They could both use more good advice in that area. But I think he would also say, hey, you seem to have forgotten, especially the Democratic candidate, the reasons that you have in America in the first place. My generation didn't fight for our freedom and independence only to hand it over to an elite in Washington who seek to run every aspect of Americans' lives. You seem to have forgotten the lesson that concentrated power always has a bad ending. That doesn't matter how good your intentions are. The last thing you want to do is to concentrate power because that is enormously corrupting. It can take the best of people and corrupt them beyond recognition in no time at all. Our founders kept saying in various ways, limit power. Focus on personal character and improvement. Any society that loses its character. What happens in the political realm isn't going to matter all that much because you're headed towards dictatorship. People of lousy character end up being governed by even lousier leaders. And there goes the American dream. So I think Washington would be very disappointed that the country's drifted so far from its founding principles. Um, but he wouldn't blame everything on the average guy. He also would have some words for the leadership of this country too.
You know, Dr. Reed, with what we're saying here, you know, the problems that the US is having, debt and whatnot, what similarities would you say that the US is having with when today when we saw the downfall of Rome?
Yeah, ancient Rome is a great topic, Patrick, one of my favorites. No two ages in history are ever, of course, precisely alike. The differences probably are greater than the similarities, especially when you're talking about a span of 2,000 years. But I have found over the years of study that the interesting parallels between the Roman Republic and the American Republic are fantastic to consider and a little bit alarming at times. The Roman Republic was founded in 508 BC, just as America was founded centuries later, in a revolt against monarchy. And the Romans, once they got rid of the last of their seven kings, they effectively said, hey, we're done with concentrated power in the hands of one man. We don't want that to ever come back again. So let's disperse power, starting by putting two people at the top instead of just one, and we'll limit each of them to just 1 year each. They were called consuls. They didn't want power to accumulate in any one or two people's hands more than a year at a time. And they also created a representative bodies. They created a Senate. reflecting noble families who could trace their lineage back to the founding of Rome. And they also invented an institutional framework to keep government at bay, keep it restrained. They invented things like habeas corpus and the separation of powers and checks and balances. And they created a constitution, although, like Britain's, it was an unwritten one, but it was a constitution that people for generations were thoroughly committed to. They wouldn't tolerate anybody who even remotely suggested he might want to be a king like they had before. That was reason enough to go shoot the guy or cut his head off because they didn't have guns yet. But they were so intent upon limiting government that they went to great lengths to bind it down by the chains of custom, precedent, and a constitution. But after several centuries of that, they began to lose it. In the second century BC, you'll find the rise of the Roman welfare state, maybe more properly called the welfare warfare state, because they got involved in costly foreign adventures. At the same time, people at home decided, hey, government, instead of just protecting us, it can give us goodies. And so politicians began to buy votes by offering the people other people's money, and that had a corrosive effect on personal character, and it gave the government ever more power. It could run your life. If it was feeding you, it could control you. And the republic just sort of dissolved over 100 years into a dictatorship. And I'm worried that we're following some of the same path. We see the fiscal insanity that Rome also experienced, trying to pay for all these programs, massive debt, erosion of value in the currency, concentration of power in the central authorities. All of that is being repeated here in America today. And it's been done in history in many places, not just Rome, but it never, ever ends well.
Part of the reason why I asked this was because when I look back at the downfall of the USSR, uh, as things got uncovered, we saw that there was really a major oligarchy going on.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder, is the US at that point where we do have sort of an oligarchy going on?
Oh, no question about it. We've built up this massive government edifice in Washington that nobody can really manage it effectively. No president today, no matter how good he or she might be, could possibly effectively manage millions of employees involving themselves in a million different ways in American life. It's just a massive, overreaching behemoth that is wreaking havoc and beyond the control of our legislative and executive and judicial branches of government. What has to be done, of course, is to pare all that back so that it's more manageable and focused on what it's supposed to do. But that's our big problem, isn't it? A government that's grown so unwieldy, so large that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And you can have a deep state develop under the nose of a president or a Congress that's devoted to its own power, and the politicians come and go, but the permanent bureaucracy is focused on keeping its own power in place. I mean, that's where we are, and we should have understood that this was inevitable if we didn't stop and reinforce our fundamental founding values.
Well, maybe we'll save deep state for for the next time. But
Okay,
your words, kind, warm, well thought out. I mean, I really do appreciate that.
thank you.
But before we head out, can you let the people know how they can see more of your views or maybe follow your work or maybe social media if you have any?
Yeah. Okay, I still write a great deal for the organization I led for many years before I retired, the Foundation for Economic Education. So you can see my stuff and a lot of other people's good stuff at fee.org. If, however, you want to zero in on just my stuff, I have my own website. And among the tabs you'll see when you go to it is the word blog. And that's where I put most of my new articles almost every week. That website is lawrenceWreed.com. LAWRENCEWREED.com.
All right, Dr. Reed, again, I thank you for the hope that you've given us. A lot of times it's hard to find hope in the things that are going on, but I thank you for that. And again, just the way you express things. I mean, I think it's pretty soothing that the way you said it. So I thank you for that. And I do hope we can do this again soon, and let's see how things unfold.
Okay, it's always a pleasure, Patrick. You know how to reach me. Look forward to the next time. Thanks again for having me.
All right, thank you also, Dr. Reed. That was Dr. Lawrence Reed sharing his views on the economy and history, past and present. To see more of Dr. Reed's work, please visit www.lawrencereed.com. If you like this video, please do subscribe, share, and give it a thumbs up. All are greatly appreciated. Audio-only versions of this interview can be found on iTunes and Spotify.